Kia ora koutou, welcome to the Internet of Awesome Things, a podcast all about the Internet of Things. I'm Russell Brown. In this series, we focused mostly on the possibilities of IoT for business and individuals, but there's a really big part of all this that involves the public sector too, and in particular, the way the places we live in operate. The concept of a smart city is broad and it encompasses a spectrum of ideas, but in essence it's about deploying information and communications technologies to make more effective and sustainable use of resources, and to make cities better places for people to live and work in. That's the concept. But how is it playing out globally? Where is it working? And what should it look like in New Zealand? To answer those questions, I'm delighted to be joined by Janat Makbul, Smart Cities Advisor to Hamilton City Council and the founder of the IoT Waikato Initiative, and Mark Thomas, the Managing Director of Singapore-based ServiceWorks, which consults on smart city initiatives around the world. Well, welcome to you both.
Thanks.
Hi, Russell.
Now, Janat, I feel like the term smart city means different things in different places. What's it mean in Hamilton?
In Hamilton, it means smart society. It means smart community. It means we're actually really having a good think about and discussion around what does smart mean and what does smart mean to different pockets of the community and what does it mean to a city that's actually there to be more livable, accessible and equitable for its citizens.
How's it manifested so far? What can we see of it?
You can see a smart space. So there's a Smart Hamilton initiative and then there's a smart space as part of that, which is really an interactive space designed to demystify technology on one hand and show what's possible and is already happening out in the wider world. And that's a collaboration between industry and the council and community groups. And the idea is that then so everyone that walks through the door should be able to resonate with something in there at least, and then they should be actually well, not that they have to, but the idea is to then encourage them to come in and give us an idea or work on a concept or talk us through something to co-create a solution from the perspective that they're coming from. There's the Smart Collective, which is a group of people that sort of get together on a regular basis and again discuss what smart is, and it's around collaborations and partnerships, and so to sort of drive that, and there are a number of other pockets of things that are either happened or happening in the technology space, but it isn't all about the technology. It's just something that's behind the scenes that really is to enable that whole equitable, accessible and livable city.
The demystifying thing's interesting, but it sort of suggests that part of the process is taking people with you.
Yes, absolutely. There's no point doing it if you don't take everybody with you, because then you don't get that diversity in the future that you need in thought and everything else. So, there's like facial recognition technology in there that's designed to just let people play with it and just sort of get an understanding of what that might be and what it looks like, and that it's not too bad.
More cities should do that. Enabling people and engaging them in a way that they understand it is critical. And so you're seeing around some cities in Asia, actually in some museums, you're seeing play spaces with the technology, with the urban problems, and actually getting people, inviting them in, kids too particularly, to say, can you help solve this?
It's your job, Mark, to see a lot of these places. Are there shared characteristics in the cities that are embracing the smart city concept?
Look, I think the short answer is probably not, because, even though the urban problems aggregate as transport or environmental, the specifics are really often very different. That's both an opportunity and a challenge, right? Because you're getting too much sort of origination, one-off production for something, when actually if cities work together more collaboratively, particularly in such a small country such as New Zealand, I think you get more economies of scale, right? But actually you get that diversity feeding into a better product.
Your company's based in Singapore, and Singapore itself is one of the more ambitious centres in the world in terms of this concept. I do kind of wonder whether that's related to the fairly high degree of authority that the state has there.
Well, I think in Singapore, if our countries worked as well as Singapore did, we probably would be as obliging. But the other side of that, of course, is the Chinese, Singaporeans, the Malays and Indians are actually quite demanding of their government, and I think the outside perception is, they're all very compliant. But in fact, part of what Singapore's achieved, this phenomenal transformation, particularly in technology, is a function of a demanding populace, actually, and then such phenomenal delivery that people have said, okay, that's great, but they're the ones actually pushing their government for more.
Jenna, one of the smart city things Hamilton's done so far, according to the website, is street lighting, replacing the old street lights with LED lighting. How is that a smart city thing?
First of all, it was a collaboration. So it was NZTA, the Waikato District Council and Hamilton City Council looking at an opportunity to do something different, do something that was around smart technology, but for a reason other than just our lights need upgrading. So it was actually over a period of time, and there's about 15,000, I think, and it cost about just over $7 million, which was partly funded by NZTA, and then there was some contributions. But the story is a story of collaboration, because it wasn't just about what light works for streets and cars, like cars on streets, but it was actually discussions with the observatory, it was discussions with the museum around the bat colonies as well, to understand discussions with residents to say, how much light is actually coming into their households, and it was a whole conversation with the community and relevant stakeholders to then pilot and then roll out lighting that in the end, if you think about from smart cities are often being, they're driven sometimes from the council's efficiency perspective. And it's saving the council, I think the estimates were about $250,000 in the first year, $500,000 in the second year, because they have a longer lifespan and they need less maintenance.
I wonder if there's also an element, and Mark, you may have thoughts here as well, on the way that services infrastructure is actually important to the development of the smart city concept. Light poles are kind of important, aren't they?
Well, city assets are kind of the key enabling tool. And, Auckland missed the opportunity to more enable our 45,000 light poles in 2015 when we went through the same process that Hamilton's gone through. And what I mean by that is, sure, we upgraded the lights and got the lighting benefits, but we didn't put sensors throughout the network. And Chicago at the same time was doing that. And so now when it snows in Chicago, they can kind of triage where the problems are. If we'd put the sensors in, we would be able to do the same when it rains. There's always going to be areas that'll flood. So the assets are the opportunity for the enablement. And we're seeing more of that now, but much more can
So
and
there's
should
kind
happen.
of an element of building for ideas that haven't been had yet, isn't there? The future-proofing infrastructure.
This is the conundrum, and this is the nervousness. I remember NZTA's first big strategy document a couple of years ago before the Auckland Transport Alignment Project, which is the agreement to fund, said, look, we're not quite sure what's going to happen in the transport technology space, but we're keeping a watching brief. And I get that, but actually the world is radically changing, particularly in transport technology, and we've got to be more aggressive and more certain, I think, about the future.
Jenna, Mark mentioned sensors there, which of course are a key part of an IoT ecology. You're probably the most prominent voice in the Waikato on the Internet of Things. Where is the city at with that? What part's this going to play?
I think we're very much at the tinkering stage, I guess, at this point. So the IoT Waikato initiative that Wintec kicked off a couple of years ago was about bringing that technology and a conversation around that technology to a number of stakeholders. That was off the back of Alex visiting from IoT London. And it's worked, and people get together in the room. As much as they're there to listen to a speaker, they're actually there to connect with other people that are interested in the same technology. So we've had examples of experiments with sensors and gateways across quarries and farms, and things have been blown up, things have drowned, things have broken, and they've actually fed that then back to this group of people that they're bouncing ideas off. In terms of the council itself, we're looking at an IoT telemetry project, which is actually just getting things that are already talking to actually talk to each other or to somewhere, and meshing that together to actually provide some insights. We've got the data from the Lime scooters that just came into town recently. We're looking at what that looks like together with other information to provide information on smart mobility, sort of in that perspective. But in terms of the hype curve, we are still tinkering. It is still a new, I wonder what this can do. I wonder how far we can push it. But there is, with the Smart Hamilton initiative, definitely a movement to sort of think then how is that relevant to our stakeholders. So an example of that is Blind Square, and having a look at what that is for the vision impaired existing assets that we have in the city, and actually looking at new things that we're doing, like the new transport hub, and how technology can apply to that, and IoT applies to that.
Mark, which cities in the world are really through the tinkering stage, especially in the handling of, as Jeanette said, all that data that's being generated? Who's really doing it?
So the IDC is a research group that publishes awards every year. They do it globally, but in the Asia Pacific, they have just put their 12 category winners out. People should check out that website to look. In our region, it's Singapore, obviously. It's also Taipei. and Seoul. Those are three of the kind of big winners, I suppose. Tokyo's doing a lot of interesting stuff ahead of the Olympics. But in our part of the world, we've got a couple of great, exciting projects happening here. New Zealand won 3 awards, which was terrific. So it's a mixture, right? New Zealand's challenge is we haven't really aggregated that across the country. So you've got cities that are bigger than us doing a lot more, and that's the opportunity. But in our region, we've got a lot of places we can look to.
Is there a conversation, Janet, going on between different cities? Because there are several New Zealand cities who have this vision. Are you talking?
Yes, we are. So the Australia-New Zealand, the Smart Cities Council Australia and New Zealand has managed to collate, will get us together on calls regularly, not just with other cities in New Zealand, but actually across Australia as well. So I've spoken to Renmark, I've spoken to Invercargill, Napier, Tauranga, Christchurch, Wellington, Auckland, and Hamilton's doing things. Tokoroa's doing some cool things in the IoT space and smart city space, and then some cities in Queensland as well, and obviously Bendigo with their initiative around the weather, and it is a great opportunity, and it's really important in that just sort of no reinventing of wheels, and hey, this is what I learned, and this is the approach that we took, and this worked and this didn't, especially because it can't be conversations, I think, between Hamilton and Sydney. So it has to be Hamilton and Renmark or Hamilton and Bendigo, and that's really useful to have that connection.
Mark, that's interesting that all those centres are on this pathway. It doesn't just have to be big global cities, does it? It works for regional centres too.
Oh, look, it absolutely does. And in fact, there's more progress being made in smaller cities. I mean, actually, internationally, most cities are small. Of course, we hear of the Londons and New Yorks. But if you talk about the US, I mean, tiny local governments. Australia, tiny local governments. I mean, Sydney's obviously 5.5 million, but they've still got 33 mayors in Sydney. So lots of things are happening in small towns. And what I'm a big fan of is aggregating that more. And so we need, I think, centrally in New Zealand, greater leadership. Land Information in New Zealand did this big study in 2015, canvassing the work that was being done in Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, and said, look, maybe if there was a central hub, not to suppress it, but to help sort of enable it and kind of share, maybe New Zealand Inc. could be making more progress.
What's the low-hanging fruit for this? Is it transport?
Well, the first low-hanging fruit is data, because the things that can be most achieved are achieved through great thinking and use of data. So before you start on the asset stuff, transport, you've got to have some kind of a data strategy and some tools to help you. And then, sure, transport is the problem in most cities. So looking at how we can gather data more, we've all got phones that produce data. Google Analytics captures that data. The data is available, actually, but many of our transport regulators still don't have a way to use that to actually make it easier for us to get around our cities.
I'm interested in what you both think about the best way of handling all this data that we're generating. Is there a best practice? Because there are going to be third parties who think that they can make good use of this as well.
Absolutely, there is. I think I actually think New Zealand's in quite a good place because we're developing our policies now. We're having the discussion. We're having the conversations now. We've got iwi, they're having the same conversations. And I think it's an opportunity to, at the same time, trial the technology as it is about that conversation to do with data governance, and even the idea of, I was reading somewhere recently about you owning your own data and then you having rules around who and what devices access that information from you, and actually it's just you and the device communicating. But then in other situations where we want to keep this is sort of the variance in the diversity of our population, some people might want to keep information confidential that identifies a population, but then there are some groups that would like to identify what's the heritage of these people or what's the background of these people, and there's some information that does need to come. So I think we're in a great position, but I agree with the comment to do with a body that can sort of pull those conversations together, and the other comment around it's the tech sector needs to come to the party with the infrastructure providers and everyone that's always done everything to do with cities and have that connection, but have that, and that's what Smart Hamilton's trying to do, is bridge that, make that sort of collaboration, the private public partnership happen. So yeah,
we need 21st century public libraries in the sky. So I'm an advocate for what I call data commons. If we think about libraries, I mean, sure, you can go in and nick a book, but people tend not to because we've established rules around that. So this hang-up we have with data is partly because we don't share it enough and we don't think of it in the same way as a public library. So let's have our cities and our countries move towards that as a model for operating where actually almost everything's available. Of course, there are rules about how you use it, but we encourage sharing and we encourage people adding their own individual knowledge to make it stronger.
I want to come back to this idea of public buy-in, because we're talking about a massive amount of data being collected and being acted on. And to be honest, I've been down the pub and talked to people about this, and their response is not actually that positive because they feel like they might be spied on. How do we handle that?
Because they don't know what's happening. And that's my argument, that actually Facebook, all of the big players, they should make it immediately available. So the first thing we should see is the dashboard, right, when we go into our Facebook profile with all of the data that's been collected. So we can kind of look at it and think, actually, no, I don't want you to collect that information. But that's not how it works. So I completely also speak to the same people in the pub who have the same concerns. So because, large organisations and governments and cities hide this stuff, we actually fester this growing concern. And it's already biting us in the arse.
Yeah, and it is a knowledge thing and it is an education thing, and it has to be an education and knowledge that's delivered to everyone, and the way that they absorb information and in the way that they access information, and it's a key part. It goes back to the same. I used to be a CIO, and if you did a IT rollout or a system software rollout, the biggest piece that you had to do was the change management. It doesn't matter how good this thing was if you didn't have everybody on board and they weren't understanding its application benefits. And issues, that change management piece needs to happen. And I think where New Zealand's at the moment is we know that the change management has to happen. There's no one really pulling that together. And the technology, everyone around the world, as Mark sort of alluded to, is doing things, and we want to jump on the bandwagon, but we need to have both things aligned, and we need that collaboration.
Just in conclusion, it strikes me that the possibilities are great, but it's as if there is a group of different things that have to change in parallel with each other. Everything from future-proofing lampposts to a data commons. There's quite a spectrum of things that need to change, aren't there?
There really is. I'm a big one of trying to distill problems down to threes. And so as part of grappling with this, you've got to have a very clear articulation of a problem you can solve. There's no point trying to solve world hunger if, I don't know, you're not God or something. And even God seems not to have done a great job with that, right? So have a clear problem. Then you've got to have a leader. You've got to have a champion. They can actually be anyone. They don't certainly have to be the chief executive or the mayor. They can be anyone who observes that they can be a power for change. And then you've actually got to have a clear idea about what you're going to do, strategy plan. There's a nervousness among some of the cities we work with to have a smart city plan. That's sort of, for some, is I don't want to have all the IT vendors coming in and giving me their wares. But those three things, problem, a leader, and a plan, are at the heart of grappling with this really big challenge, in my view.
Yeah, John, that's interesting because the IT vendors coming in, that's been a fact of local government for a long time, but in a way, this isn't really about the IT vendors, is it?
No, and we've with the smart space, as soon as we put up this concept of the smart space and all the conversations that we've had for a very long time, vendors understood it as an opportunity to display their wares, basically, and put their brand up. And yes, their brand is there, and yes, it talks about what they can do, but actually the conversation is really, what is the context? What was the problem? What was the solution? What was the outcome? And then a little bit about the technology, because the audience isn't a purchaser. The audience is actually a user and somebody that's going to be impacted by that technology. And the conversation is just as relevant to all of those as it is between the buyer and the seller of a solution or a potential solution. I mean, without an application, technology is just technology. And really you should, I like this concept I heard recently about software as a city, or I think it was city as a software, and really the city behind the scenes should just enable things. And the conversation is about how you use this software, which is a city, and not about what's making up. We don't worry about sewage pipes, and we don't worry about where the water goes and all that. I certainly don't think about it, and that's where technology needs to be behind the scenes. And that's what we're trying to do with the Smart Hamilton initiative around that collaboration approach. Is that my role is to come up with as Mark alluded to, like a problem or an opportunity, I call it in some cases, and then to connect the technology provider through me to this potential user or application, and actually nut that out for what it really is and what the potential is, involving the right people, and then what's displayed in the space that other people interact with is the outcome. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to this conversation unfolding, and I'm quite confident you're both going to be a key part of it. Cheers.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Russell.
Thanks, Russell.
Janet Muckbill of Smart City Hamilton and Mark Thomas of ServiceWorks. Time now for a deeper dive into a specific smart city topic, transport. With me now is Roger Jones, Executive General Manager of Technology at Auckland Transport and an unabashed agent of change. Oh, welcome, Roger.
Yeah, welcome. Good to be here.
Now, how has Auckland Transport addressed the smart city concept? What's it mean to AT?
So AT fits into the bigger ecosystem of the whole city. So we're transport focused, which is all about roads, moving people around. So we have to fit into the bigger landscape of how you get a smart city and what that means for the community and the citizens and the visitors that come here. So from a transport perspective, it's how we interact with all those citizens and people coming here. Bearing in mind that tourists and things have an overseas experience, so they come here with a preconception of what should be available to them as a tourist in terms of technology, data and information. And our citizens here, they travel a lot, and they also have expectations that the city will provide them with exactly what they need, comparable to their overseas experiences if they have them.
I guess it's a key thing that AT is not just responsible for the vehicles that trundle around the streets, but the streets themselves and the services. That's quite key, isn't it?
It is very key, and people tend to forget we're also just as responsible for ensuring that the goods can get around the city, because it's all very good people getting around, but people need things to eat and live, and these days with click and collect, they expect their goods to be delivered home. So it's about making sure that the freight industry and all that commercial industry and the plumbers and everything can get around the city as well.
Now, speaking of streets, there's also a smart street in development down at Wynyard. Tell me about that.
So what we've done in Wynyard Quarter is we're working with some of our vendors and some of our suppliers to showcase what's the art of the possible. So new innovations that might impact on a street scanscape in terms of technology or data or information to people that are using those facilities or passing those facilities. We're putting that technology in. So things like a solar-powered seat, which will recharge an e-bike and which you can plug in a phone charger, smart sensoring on our traffic lights to indicate when people are actually waiting rather than just pushing the button. We've put some smart technology in there for the visually impaired people so that we'll interact with their mobile phones and things so they know when to cross because they can't see. So we're doing all sorts of stuff there in conjunction with our partners to showcase the art of the possible, try things and, see what's possible.
Yeah, that's interesting because several of those things you just reeled off there are responses to needs in the community. I guess you could say the same thing about the shift to e-commerce and dispatch and that kind of thing. Is that something you have to keep in mind, is what that people actually need?
Yeah, it's all about the people. So smart cities is all about people and what they need and what they want to get around.
Now, one thing you said at an event that I moderated last year, and I've seen you say it a few other times, is the big solutions are dead. What's that mean?
Well, if you take for us, for instance, our bus prediction engines, we used to buy monolithic systems, very expensive, very proprietary, to track buses around the city and put the arrival times on the signs and things like that. And what we've done is broken those down into little components, and using components from AWS, from Azure, from third parties, you can make components and services, and then as one gets better, you can rip it out and replace it, so you can constantly be improving and looking to do it better and cheaper than buying one big system. I mean, the current system that was in there was 15 years old, for example, and we really couldn't afford to replace it. Doing it this way, a lot cheaper, and it's more flexible.
What part does the Internet of Things play in what you're doing now, and how's that going to play out?
The Internet of Things is huge, especially with 5G coming down in a few years' time. they will have big impacts on the way data and information is communicated to people and vehicles and things like that. We're starting to see that now, but for instance, traffic lights. If you're a 30-ton truck coming down towards a set of traffic lights, it would be nice to know if you have to brake or not, or whether you're going to get a green light. And that has fuel savings. It has savings for the car user as well, because if you stop a truck like that and it goes green, it takes a long time for it to get going again, and you only get one truck through. If you can smooth that thing out, then everyone benefits.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that's yet another angle. It's not just about the vehicles you're responsible for. We're in an age where telematics is going into vehicles operated by ordinary people out there. How does that affect what you do?
It's a new lens. It's a new way of communicating to people. So that's another communication channel to devices and vehicles. And so we have to work out what information people might want and how that could be delivered in essentially a non-distracting manner. And what do you deliver to them? Because you don't want to deliver useless information or information overload, but what is it that they actually need? So we do a lot of work currently with citizens and people to find out what it is they're after, and then we're trying to work out how we'll deliver that.
And a lot of that's about the way you handle data. The systems that you're developing now are going to already generate a lot more data. Where are you at on the road to actually making the best use of that?
So we collect a lot of data, and we're going to collect a lot more, as you say, in the future. So we're starting to use it, as we always have, for transport planning, but we're now using it for predictive analytics. So, for instance, we're working now on the ferries. So if you're on the last ferry home and the last bus is waiting for the ferry and the ferry's running late, the bus is contracted to leave on time, we now have the ability to work out whether we should hold that bus, because we know how many people are on the ferry, we know how many people are going to be impacted at the downstream bus stops. So using predictive analytics, we can now make suggestions to our operators about hold the bus, it's only 3 minutes and there's 30 people going to be impacted, or actually it's 3 minutes and there's only one person and we can do something different for that one person. So it's an evolution, but it's more about the predictability, and then how do we get that to our customers so they know what's going on.
Do you have a view on how much and how third parties should be able to access the kind of data you're working with? Because there are third parties who want to provide things like traffic information.
Yep. So we make a lot of our data available through public APIs. We embrace the government initiatives around open source and open data. We are working to constantly try and make more data available to those parties. We can't provide this solution for everything, and people will take our data, integrate it to other bits of data and make it useful to people in a different way, and that's great.
One thing I've been reading quite a lot about in terms of smart cities is the idea of mobility as a service. The multi-mode journeys where you hop on an e-scooter to get to the bus stop, to get to the train. How far away are we from that, and how's it going to come to pass?
At a concept level overseas, we see that working, and some European cities have it working. Here, it's a little bit more difficult. We see ourselves as a facilitator. We're not convinced, and we're doing a lot of research at the moment around whether we should be the collector of the cash for the total journey and responsible for the journey. So you pay for your Lime scooter, and you pay for your bus, and you pay for your Uber or a taxi or whatever at the other end. Is that a payment all to come through us, or is it at the operator level? Those decisions are where we're looking at the moment, and we're working with our customers around how does that pan out. Because if you start a trip and something goes wrong and you've already paid us for the complete journey, how do we make that right for you? And it gets more complicated. So, yeah, we're working through those in terms of how it will actually work here in New Zealand.
I guess in some ways, devising things like that are software-based is easier than maybe some of the infrastructure changes you're going to have to make, because there's a key part for infrastructure in the idea of a smart city, isn't there?
Absolutely, infrastructure, and we're working towards that now. What is going to be in a new subdivision? What infrastructure do we need to put there? We're already putting in piping, and with 5G mesh networks on the poles, LED street lighting. How you couple that together. autonomous vehicles, how they would work in there, how you get parcels picked up and dropped, or a new couch picked up and dropped into some of those new suburbs in the new way of living with smaller streets and you're not necessarily home. So how do we coordinate that? There's a lot of thinking going on around that.
Now, speaking of autonomous vehicles, I guess that you are expecting to be operating some of those in the next 5 years?
I wouldn't say the next 5 years. The research we see is that it's still some distance away, and we realise that there's some working overseas, but there's still issues around the liability of those cars, and we expect to see that played out, especially in the US. When there's an accident, who do they sue? In the US, it's not so applicable here. But the issues of liability, we think, will slow down the adoption of those vehicles, apart from low speed or vehicles operating in a closed environment, like the Christchurch Airport, which is low speed, closed environment, relatively safe.
Do you think that public transport autonomous vehicles will come first?
I think the trucking industry is probably further advanced. So if you look at the US, pontooning trucks is a reality in some states. That's a step toward true autonomous vehicles. So I think the trucking industry and the car industry will drive ahead of public transport.
And just finally, if this whole thing is a big digital transformation for AT and the council as a whole, how far are you through this? Out of 10?
I think, nobody has defined actually what a smart city is. Everybody has smarts in a city, and different cities have different smarts. So it's very hard to gauge how far you're along to something that's unknown. But I think we're up there in certain aspects. I look around the world, every city's ahead in some bits and behind in others, and I think that's very applicable here. We're definitely ahead in some areas, and we're certainly up there on the leading edge on bits and pieces, and we're behind on other bits and pieces.
Well, I think it's going to be fascinating to watch. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you.
Auckland Transport's Technology Chief Roger Jones. And that's the end of this episode, and with that, the conclusion of this season of the Internet of Awesome Things. If you'd like to learn more, you can go to spark.co.nz/IoT or email iot@spark.co.nz. And if you just can't get enough, feel free to check out my other podcast, Actually Interesting, which is about artificial intelligence. That's brought to you by Microsoft, and you can find it in the Future section of the Spin-Off website. I dare say you'll see me around the traps talking IoT, but for now, thanks heaps to our guests, to Gareth Thomas for our theme music, to Cooper's sound design for the production magic, to Spark for making it possible, and of course, to you for listening. I've been Russell Brown, and it's been a pleasure talking to smart people about smart things. Goodbye.